I'm getting old. I'm getting old.
Phones are on mute. This is a special meeting for the City Council. It's Tuesday, April 11th, 2023. It's 6 p.m. and I'll call this meeting to order now and call for a quorum check, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Neville.
Aye.
Councilmember Buck.
Here.
Councilmember Goolsby.
Here.
Councilmember Najarian.
Here.
Councilmember Shelby.
Present.
Councilmember Vaughan.
Here.
Quorum is here. We shall proceed. Before we move on to our next item, we do have a short invocation and a pledge afterwards, which we had not included in the original agenda, but I think it's appropriate to do this. So Ms. Turner's going to do the invocation, and I'll do the pledge. So everyone, please stand.
Let us pray. Lord, we bless your holy name, and we forget not the gifts that you have given us. You who pardons all sins, heals all ills, redeems our lives from the pit, you who crowns us with mercy and compassion, and fills our day with good things, and renews us each day. Help us, Lord, to walk without blame and to do what is right. Send forth your Spirit to guide us. May your glory endure forever, and may we abound in hope in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for attending this meeting. This is obviously a special meeting to discuss the venue tax projects and some options that are available to us this evening. We'll conduct it very similar to a regular council meeting. That'll open up for citizens to be heard first, and then we'll have presentations, and it opens up for discussion for council. No action will be taken this evening. This is purely a discussion item, but it's of unique importance, I think, for our city now and into the future. So that's why we call it a special meeting to have this workshop this evening. So I don't have the roster. Do we have a list of those that signed up? Hang on, we'll get that list. And I'll give you an opportunity to address us if you had not signed up as well. So. Okay, there have been 8 people that have signed up this evening, so I'll call you up in order that you signed in this evening, and then I'll give everybody else the option if they have not had a chance to sign in. So the first person signed up this evening is Ms. Kim Eigelhart. Ma'am, again, when you come up here, please give us your name and address for the record.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Kim Eigelhart. I live at 736 Garden Meadow Drive. Every year, we give the golf course a fixed percentage of sales tax revenue, regardless of its actual needs, unable to redirect any part of it to pressing infrastructure and safety needs. Because it is a percentage rather than a fixed amount, and because our retail economy has been so successful, the yearly amount has increased substantially since the inception of the venue tax, much more so than the annual rate of inflation. This ready availability of ever-increasing public funding year after year has resulted in typical spending habits that ignore fiscal responsibility. The time is long overdue to require the golf course to develop and implement a business plan that will result in its success. The best way to do this is to give it less tax-based funding each year, not more. However, we cannot control the amount of money the golf course receives if we continue the venue tax. Therefore, I'm asking you to support a ballot proposition that would eliminate the venue tax of 1% and create a dedicated street maintenance tax in the amount of 1/2%. Furthermore, I'm calling for the creation of an actual street maintenance program with full transparency and accountability. We have a Parks Master Plan available online. Why not streets? As far behind as we are, there should always be multiple streets under construction. If Randy is spread too thin, then something needs to change. This is something the city manager needs to evaluate and address. All I know is that last year, shortly before elections, Council authorized the spending of the remaining money from the previous street bond package. Although that was a year ago, I don't believe these projects are yet underway. While I know going out for bids takes time, one would think it would be mostly boilerplate language and should not take a year to draft. As I have said before on the record, our streets are in a deplorable condition, and the recently approved $30 million street bond package isn't nearly enough money to make the needed repairs. 100 streets that have been in need of repair since 2008, 15 years ago. However, it really does not matter how much money we authorize for repairs if the work is not being performed in an expeditious manner. Please, we can do better. We have to. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your comments. Next individual assignment this evening, Ms. Ashton Bowman.
Ashton Bowman, 12807 El Dorado. Since we're doing the presentation tonight, I was kind of hoping to hold my comments until after the presentation. That way we knew what the city was putting forth and what options were going to be discussed, and that way the citizens could have an input on those exact discussions tonight as opposed to waiting for it to go on the agenda. But since that can't happen, I'm just going to firmly state the position that I've already stated a million times to all of you gentlemen, is that I firmly believe that the citizens should get to vote whether they want to continue to fund the golf course through the venue tax or not. I think you guys should really consider the citizens when you're thinking about this. I have walked and talked to so many people, and I feel like a giant group of people who don't show up at these meetings are paying attention, and they do care. Just because they're not here doesn't mean that they don't care and that they don't want to be heard. It's just not everyone has the time to be at all of these meetings. I think that the citizens should really get to vote on this instead of just you guys deciding that everyone should continue to fund this. I really think we should take into consideration letting them vote. If the city votes and they decide that they want this venue tax to go to the golf course, wonderful. That's what the city has spoken, and they've decided that's what they want to do. But I don't believe it should be put in the city's hands. I believe it should be put in the citizens' hands, that they should get to decide what they want to do. So I'm hoping that you guys will consider that tonight when you guys are going through all of the options.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. All right, next individual signed up this evening is Christina, is it
Fitzpatrick.
Fitzpatrick? Yes.
I sure did. I didn't have room.
Okay.
Hi, Christina Fitzpatrick at 206 Quail Drive. I really appreciate the fact that this meeting was scheduled. The venue tax has been a heavily debated topic. This is a great chance for everyone here just to listen and to learn. To learn the history of the venue tax, to the opposing opinions, and to the options that our city has with these funds with guidance from Council. But I think the one thing that is really important is the fact that we really still technically have time. There's not a looming deadline to take immediate action. We have until August if we choose to get it onto the ballot. So there's time just to take a pause. Council, you have time. Most people in this room walked in with an opinion, and after this meeting, hopefully we all walk out with new information and perhaps an understanding of people's different perspectives. Our city and council will always have money for streets and emergency services. This has been a priority in the past and will remain so in the future for the city. Our streets are funded, emergency services are funded, An important consideration about the city streets is really the work will never be done. There will always be streets that need to be repaired. Even with normal wear and tear, they're going to continue to evolve, and that doesn't take into a catastrophic accident like a sinkhole or something like that that could impact our streets. As citizens, we may wish for more transparency related to the street priorities or conditions, but we also know that each year work is being done to repair our streets. The venue tax is an opportunity to earmark money to benefit specific parts of our community that provide value to our citizens and potentially to attract visitors. Visitors that spend money and generate tax revenue. In 5 years, council could have spent this pool of money on our streets, or they could have voted to direct it towards developing and improving areas that help market Universal City as a great place to live, work, and visit. I ask that each of you take the time to be thoughtful in your consideration of the options that are going to be in front of you tonight and going forward at future meetings. Each of you was elected to make decisions that position Universal City in a solid manner both now and in the future.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, next individual signed up this evening is Ms. Carol Butler.
Hi, Mayor, Council. My name is Carol Butler. I live at 501 Kimberly Drive. You know, I usually don't talk in a forum like this. It takes a lot sometimes to talk around these wonderful people. And I really, today, you've seen me here before, and I just pray that the Lord would just make me say the right things. That's the most important thing. I'll be honest, I see things on Nextdoor. People are being ugly. I don't care if you're from the golf course, you don't like the golf course, I don't care. That's not it. So I want you to know where I stand. I don't mind the golf course. My son, I told you the last time, he loves the golf course. He's a businessman now. And I started thinking today, what is it about this golf course? Why has it caused such a rift in our community? And I came up with the answer, which y'all are going to love. And it's because we have made this golf course, it's a business. And we're treating it like an individual that's on welfare. We live in the United States of America. We all came from people who came over on a boat or a ship or a train or something. And they came here because this is a free enterprise place. You work hard. All of my people did. I have people for my great-great-grandparents living here, working hard, trying to make something of themselves. I worked hard. Maybe y'all don't think I made anything of myself, but I did my best. I didn't ask for anything. I worked hard, took care of my family, took care of my mother when she was ill, my father, my brother, everybody. I don't take welfare, but we have made the golf course. What have they had? They have not had this idea that they have to work hard. They have their hand out every year because what incentive do they have to work hard and make the golf course work for all the people? The golf course is fine. It doesn't matter. But you can't keep giving money to them. How many? I've heard 17 to $30 million. I don't care. It's too much money. You've taken the pride away from the people who are running that golf course. Make them work like you and you and you and you have all worked very hard. I know you are wonderful people now who have been elected by the people, who have entrusted you with a very big decision. I say, and we're not through. We still have to pay for those gold cards. That when I hear people say, well, they're all self-sufficient, they're not self-sufficient. And you're going to keep having to pay for it. Make a decision. This is what you guys have been elected for. You're amazing. And I thank you personally for all you have done for each and every one of you. I thank you for listening to me. It's hard. It's just real hard. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it very much. Okay, next individual this evening is Mr. Ken Mitz.
Good evening. Ken Mitz, live at 13410 Adonis. And bear with me while I read this. There's a lot of facts. I just want to make sure that everybody, especially those in the audience, have a background before you all start to debate what to do with the venue tax. Last year, the city was required by law to give the golf course over $1.6 million of its sales tax revenues due to a 2002 voter-approved measure which requires the city to dedicate to the golf course 25% of its annual sales tax revenues. Since the passage of this venue tax, the city has given over $17 million of sales tax revenues to the golf course. Remember, the city marketed the 1997 bond vote to construct the golf course by saying the course would be a moneymaker for the city. Some history leading up to today's workshop is as follows. 93 ad valorem bond vote for $6.6 million to construct the golf course was defeated 920 to 1,037 against. 1997, the bond vote for $7.3 million to build the golf course was approved. Votes for 1,076 against 839. In 2002, the City Council placed on a ballot measure where the residents of UC wanted the city to dedicate 25% of its sales tax revenues to the golf course. These are revenues that must be given to the golf course and can't be used for any other purposes. Remember, the golf course was supposed to be a moneymaker for the city. Obviously, in 2002, the City Council realized the golf course could not survive financially on its own revenues, so they proposed a venue tax. The residents approved this measure, votes for 316 against 141. Note the low turnout for this vote. In summary, the city went from saying the course only needed $6.6 million in 93 to needing $7.3 million in 97 to, in 2002, giving the course a permanent stream of money with passage of a voter-approved venue tax, requiring the city to dedicate 25% of its sales tax revenues to the golf course. To date, the amount of money the city has given the golf course is well over $24 million. Over $17 million of those funds have come from the city's sales tax revenues. Had the city not dedicated all those funds to the golf course, they may not have had to ask the voters this year to approve the issuance of a bond of $30 million to acquire funds to improve the streets in Universal City. It is notable that during a January 25, 2005 City Council meeting, Mayor Pro Tem Williams made a motion to allow the city manager to pursue the lease or sale of the golf course. He knew that the golf course was a financial mistake. The motion passed, the city found no takers to buy or lease the golf course. During the same meeting, the council approved giving the course $219,000 to repair the conference center. This above the venue tax money that was already provided to the golf course. It's time to give the residents another opportunity to vote on the venue tax, but only after full and accurate disclosure of all the money given to the golf course, along with current and accurate financial statements regarding the operations of the golf course. This information should be presented to the residents of UC prior to the next venue tax vote. Continuing to pump millions of dollars into the golf course without current voter approval is a failure, in my opinion, of the council's fiduciary responsibility to the residents of Universal City. This is not about keeping or getting rid of the golf course. It's about a way in which the city continues to fund the golf course. What if the golf course becomes a cash cow it was promised to be back in 97? It no longer needs a venue tax, but because it's law, they're going to continue to get the venue tax.
Wrap it up, sir, please.
I think that's when they need to go ahead and put it in the annual budget process. Recommendation for this is for the city council to put forth a resident vote measure for city residents if they want to continue to dedicate 25% of the city sales tax revenue to the golf course each year. Please do not put a reduced amount of venue tax funding. That will only put the responsibility to eliminate the venue tax on future city councils and will require another city vote on venue tax funding for the golf course. Do what's in the best interest of most of the residents of Universal City. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. Next individual this evening, Ms. Diane Woods.
Diane Woods, 13415 Muses. Good evening and thank you for this opportunity. I know this is about the venue tax, but first let me say, I like having the Golf and Event Center and don't want it to go away. However, the purpose of the venue tax, which was approved by the citizens of this city, has been met. It should not be directed to another purpose without a new vote by the citizens. Personally, I think it should go back into the annual budget process. This will allow the city council, who are elected by the citizens, to determine the best current need for the funds. Needs change, and the council should have the resources to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it very much. Next individual, Mr. Bernard Rubal. Mr. Rubal.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Bernie Rupel, 635 Balboa Drive, Universal City. We've been here before. Actually, we've been here, well, at least some of us, the mayor, and even our city manager in a different hat. We've been here before in 2005 where we just say, well, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. We've been here before, the group of us, where I've stood before you in 2001 saying, where's the business plan for the golf course? Where's the business plan for the golf course? The question isn't venue tax per se, it's essentially the tax burden that gets shifted to the people and they get shorted every time. Okay, so basically $30 million in a bond, $18 million in venue tax, okay? So basically $18 million in venue tax that isn't going to the infrastructure needs of our city. Means that Mr. Neville and I will not be around to see the streets reconstructed. It's 20 years, it's 20 years away, okay? We need, even identified in 2005 by this council, we need the infrastructure repair, okay? We need to focus on infrastructure. We want you to put our needs before our wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubal. Appreciate it. Last individual that signed up to see is Dwayne Ryan.
Dwayne Ryan, 107 Oak Circle. So there isn't a whole lot of new things that I'm going to say that hasn't already been said, but that's okay because that means that we're all kind of on the same page. Really, this, the golf course, it's a business, right? If it fails, let it fail. If it succeeds, great, let it succeed. If we're going to invest in something and it's not succeeding, then we need to either sell it off or let it fail. Like it's pretty straightforward. So like if there's no if there's not a business plan for the golf course to succeed and we've given it plenty of time, then it just needs to be able to fail. Just like Ms. Butler says, this is capitalism here. If you can't survive on your own merits, then it's not right to make the rest of the city subsidize that for you. So, and then to reiterate what we were saying before is that, for however long we've been doing this, here's this extra tax that we're using to subsidize this. Now that that is no longer necessary, the law doesn't say that we have to do that anymore. What are we going to do with that tax? As far as I'm concerned, that tax is over. We shouldn't even have that money anymore. Meaning, give the taxes back to, it's not like we're giving it back, but stop the taxing. We can use that money, right? If we need to, and then bring the citizens back in when we find something that we do want to spend it on. Don't just keep collecting the money and then go find a place to put it. That's bad business too, right? You don't go after the money until you need the money. So identify what that need is, bring the citizens in, and we'll vote on it like we did before, especially on big things like this. So I guess that's all I got to say is, give the money back. When we find out what it is that we want to spend the money on, we do another vote on it, and the citizens can be heard. You guys can talk about it, have all these ideas, and then go, hey, we want to spend this huge chunk of money. What do you citizens think about that? Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. That's why we're here tonight. Thank you for coming. Did anyone else want to address council that didn't get a chance to sign up?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Maxwell?
I apologize, I did not sign up, but Tom Maxwell, 1251 Civil Oaks Trail, Universal City. You guys got a big decision to make tonight, a lot of choices. The only thing I'm going to say is that every person sitting up there, at some point in time, even you, Mr. Vaughan, has received a vote from me to sit there. That means that we voted for you to make these types of decisions without going to a public vote. You have all the information to make a decision what is best for the city of Universal City and 20,000+ citizens. That is represented by about 50 people here. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Becky Ryan, 107 Oak Circle. I disagree respectfully that this is a big decision, so it should go to a vote to the city. Just because this room is filled, maybe it's because of the size of the room, not the number of seats that are filled in it. If it was a bigger room, we would have filled it on previous occasions for different things that have come up, but it's not that big room. It's like church. When it's 80% full, people stop going. Secondly, I echo Ashton's comments that it's very hard to comment previous to a meeting's discussion, so I don't even know what to actually agree or disagree with that you're about to talk about. I really am frustrated by the process, and I feel like just because it's in the books written to be done this week, it could be changed. We would love to be able to hear what you have to say and then be able to get up and say, we don't really agree with that idea, or we really love this idea. Nobody even thought about that. But we can't do that because we're talking now completely blind, which makes zero sense to hopefully a lot of people and hopefully to y'all. Lastly, we're not anti-golf course, we're anti-tax subsidization. So we're not anti-golf course. You know, if it can succeed, fine. It hasn't shown to. So let's take that into great, deep consideration. And lastly, what I would like to hear from you tonight is what is this process going to look like? Other than tonight, this workshop, is this it? Is this your only time to discuss? Do we get another chance to come before you? What is the process between now and a final decision going to look like? Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so let's move on then to conduct the actual workshop, present and discuss the venue tax projects and options. I will ask staff, would they please hand out copies of what is before council. So you can all have a copy of what we're going to be discussing.
Yeah, the copies, Mayor, we recognize that the screens, although they're large when they're up there, sometimes it's hard for people to see. Also, I have some people I'm looking at to make sure we have good volume control. I will start, it kind of looks like a CNN press room in here, or whatever station you happen to watch. With all of the cameras, I will just say we are getting ready for our PEG channel, so the staff is testing 4 different cameras this evening to see which ones provide better sound and quality, so if anyone's wondering about what's going on with that. Let me just give them a second to hand them out. And I'm looking at the audience. Can you all hear fine?
While I'm passing out, let me just give some of the comments here.
Maribel is indicating that between you, she will make some copies.
This evening is a discussion only. There's no action taken. That we wanted to have this special meeting so that we completed the discussion. It was part of our meeting 2 weeks ago, and we realized that there's a lot more to come. And we need to discuss this in open session with you all present. And that's why we had a special meeting this evening. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to cover kind of where we come from and where we are today, and then I'm going to hand it over to your legal counsel, and they're going to have some discussions with you. This is the same slide that some of us have seen before. So this appears what we agreed on thus far. When I say we, I mean the council. One, and the comment was made, no one really wants to get rid of the golf course. Everyone has agreed that the golf course facility does need some upgrades and repairs, perhaps some expansions. Also that in 2023, which is the fiscal budget that we're in right now, that the venue tax is already committed to the final bond payment and to some erosion repair. And that in 2024, which is our next budget cycle, there are options that are available for the city that were not possible before, which is why we're having this discussion this evening and past evenings and future evenings. Consideration of the future uses and divisions of the venue tax is really what we need to discuss, and that's why we're here. On the next slide, I believe this is what we have not yet agreed upon. When I say not yet, I'm the council. One is we haven't really determined. Can you advance the slide, Kristen?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was right here with me. Got it. Now we're both doing it. Thank you. I don't think we've really discussed or come to a conclusion yet what the end goal is. I don't think that we've necessarily explored all the compromises or the alternatives to get to the end goal. Also, we have put into place a financing plan for repair of the golf course. We haven't fully explored all of the options to proceed with splitting with the tax, reallocating it, and or redirecting the venue tax. And then we haven't really even decided on when is the most appropriate time to do that. And then last time, we don't even have a timeline thus far, and hopefully we will. They'll give us some direction on how and when to implement those final decisions that you're going to make. So what we had discussed, again, this is a repeat from previous discussions, is that we have decided that as a group, we need to memorialize the options that we have available to us. So recognize the complexity of the issue, try to weed out some false information, disingenuous information, misinformation, distracting information, all kinds of information that appears to be polarizing people and perhaps creating some partisanship. We kind of need to weed through all of that so that we are making a well-informed decision. Lastly, we talked about the fact that we needed to commit to exploring all of the options, which is why we're here this evening, and I thank you all for agreeing for the workshop. Perhaps you spend some more time understanding the challenges of each of the options that we're going to be looking at, and then consider some short-term and long-term consequences and impacts on future generations. I know we're all talking about now, but we have to remember that, I think as Mr. Ruval said, at some point, none of us will be here. I don't know when that is. I don't think any of us do, but we need to remember that we are having an impact on future generations and future taxpayers as well. So Mr. Kenton did an excellent job giving some background on the golf course, and it is a very complex history. I think that's maybe one of the things we can all agree on. So the 1993 bond measure, it failed. It was a joint project between Selma and University City and the developer. That failed. 1993 to 97, parcels were identified for the golf course. 7 parcels were gifted to the city. 7 parcels were gifted to the city, and the city did purchase 1 parcel. In 1997, the measure did pass for the golf course as well as the bonds. They were 25-year bonds with interest-only payments for the first 5 years, which is about $1.5 million. And then the total bond package in 1997 was $5.93 million, and it had an interest of rounding $5.6 million. So moving on, we began construction with Granite Golf, and they were the ones that actually constructed and managed the facility. Early on in the construction, there were some issues that put it behind and put it over budget. That was the issue with the Licon Indian, I think they're called Licon Apache Indian tribe. There were some legal issues with them. They claimed that the land was theirs. We also found numerous burial sites on there, and had to bring in a lot of state agencies to do the examinations, which caused a lot of time and delay on the building of the golf course, and a couple of lawsuits. So in 2000, the Olympia Hills Golf Course and Conference Center opened, and Granite Golf, at that time then by the city, was replaced with Kemper Sports. Kemper actually managed and ran the facility for the city with a contract fee that they got on a monthly basis. The city was responsible for covering all of the costs of operating it, as well as the staff and the debt, and so Kemper Sports was paid on top of what was already owed. In 2000 to 2002, that's when the city first understood that they had insufficient revenues. There weren't that many operational shortfalls, but there was already a debt payment that had to be made. And the revenue that was using or pledged to cover that debt was the general fund, right? So now the city is facing a position, well, how do we stop bleeding from the general fund, and what can we do to stop that bleed? And so that's when the 2002 election came into being for the venue tax, and the venue tax was passed. However, even at that time, the amount of funds that were received from the venue tax was not sufficient to cover all of the debt and the management expenses that the city was incurring. Then they moved on to 2005, 2002 to 2005. That is kind of when the city began doing some interloans from the general fund to the golf operating for the debt payments and for some additional repairs and management fees that needed to be made. And again, the venue tax even then wasn't high enough in the city to cover all of those expenses. In 2005, which was a bad year for everybody around Texas, that's when the floods hit, and that's when we got holes 19, 11, and 17 got wiped out. At that time, the cost to recover those were estimated about $650,000. I believe it might have come in a little bit more than that. I'm looking at Randy, and he's shaking his head. So we had the same meeting that we have here today. Somebody said we've been here before. We were right, we've been here before. So in 2005, the council had directed staff at that time to put together some options on what to do with the golf course. That included repairing, selling, leasing out, closing it, transitional uses, half and half uses, and things of that nature. So in 2005, the city did put an RFP out for buyers. All of the RFPs that came back, nobody wants to buy it. They only want to lease it on our behalf again. Well, hello, we've already been through that twice. We went through that with Granite Golf, and then we went with Kemper Golf. At that time, that was when the city made the decision that they were going to run the golf course themselves and handle it. And so that is when there was some additional interfund loans that were made from the general fund reserves to the golf course operating, but that was to elevate and reconstruct the holes that had been wiped out in the flood because the insurance didn't cover that. Moving up to 2008, I don't know how or why all this happened, but there was a portion of the 1997 bonds that were refinanced, and they were done as 15-year certificates of obligations. The remaining 1997 bond portion was refinanced in 2012. Both had some interest-only payments. Again, I don't understand why. Not a finance person or a bond attorney. And so there were a lot of balloon payments mixed in with those. In 20 to 2023, the golf course operations are at or near break even. The venue tax has been used in the last 4 or 5 years really to pay for the balloon debt payments. And so what I mean by balloon, one of them was, well, both of them were really just under $500,000. So that's $1 million in the venue tax that went not to golf course operations, but went to pay off the debt service. And remember, the debt belongs to the city, even though the city operates the golf course. The two are intermingled. And then also at that time, there was more damage with erosion that was done to holes 6 and 7. And then the remaining money for those years were used to make those specific repairs. So here we are in 2023, and the venue tax, the final balloon payment has been made. Now we're repairing the damage that is on hole 8 and 9. When I say damage, it's not to the holes themselves, it's actually to the drainage system. And so that brings us up to date. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the 2002 ballot language because I think we're going to spend a lot of our time this evening having some discussion on that. The venue tax proposition is what established a venue project. And we kind of need to make sure that we're using, when we say golf course, that we're using golf course and venue project intermingled. So when the golf course is paid off, the venue project remains. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that the venue project remains. We call it the golf course, but in the eyes of the law and the finance world, it's still considered a venue project. Also, if the venue project is reallocated away from Olympia Hills still remains a venue project. So we kind of have to keep that as we move forward into our discussion with your legal counsel. And then the last thing, and again, this is just a last estimation on what we think you're trying to get to. We're hoping we'll get a little more clarification on that this evening. that we believe that one of your end goals is to get as much money as possible to the general fund, whether that be through the interfund loan repayment, through an annual administrative transfer, or implementation of the 2002 ballot language to fund spaces, linear parks, and parks improvements. Also, we believe that one of your end goals is probably to reallocate venue tax to pay for some general city capital improvements. Lastly, we think, and we hope you give us some clarity, that your goal is to improve and maintain the golf course and event conference center as an investment and an asset of the city. So I guess the question then that we need to be asking ourselves as we go throughout the rest of the night is, can we accomplish everything we want without having to go to the expensive election or a re-election 3 years from now or whatever it happens to be? And if we go to election, is there a possibility that we make compound items that have not yet been addressed? So that's all my comments for now. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Clay, and he will introduce himself. You want me to run that?
That's great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Clay Benford. I'm a bond attorney with the law firm called Parkhurst & Horton, a senior partner here in San Antonio, representing the city as its bond counsel. With me, I have Rose Kanuski, who is my colleague and is a local elections expert that supports our practice and also provides representative services to Universal City. I've been doing this exclusively in the space since 2001. I was not involved in the prior history that Ms. Turner went through as we talked about how you got here. But I do have familiarity with the general concepts. We represent many other local government in their approval, expenditure, management of venue tax projects, and dispense and expenditure of proceeds and funds. And when I'm called in to look at something like this, the first thing that I want to see is the background documentation, because we do know that there is a history upon which that documentation was based, but as we interpret it, we have to look at the plain language of the documentation to understand exactly what we would interpret and advise as an independent third party coming in, reviewing and telling you exactly what is the status of your legal condition and how do you have to respect what has been done and apply on the future in accordance with what you've agreed to. And we start with that with what is the basic contract with the voters that was put in place in 2022. That is the current election that remains valid and was the basis for not only the identification of the project as a venue project, but the source of revenue that we're now talking about. And so we look at this ballot language, which is on the screen in front of you, and I will just read it. It says the adoption of an additional 0.5% local sales and use tax to be used by the city to reimburse the cost of a municipal golf course and conference center, to provide for funds for financing of said project, to provide for open spaces for public use in the city of Universal City based on linear parks and improvements, the payment and reimbursement for a municipal conference center and golf course, including related infrastructure, designated said project as required by Chapter 334 Texas Local Government Code for the purpose of financing the venue project. Now that is a lot of words and combined into a very long sentence. And we have to interpret things that you might think are similar, but we have to interpret them as having separate and distinct meaning, as Texas law requires that words are used purposefully and with intent that they each carry individual meaning. That means that you don't say the same thing twice in two different ways but mean the same thing. So we have to look at this and say, you said conference center, municipal golf course, linear parks, open space, related infrastructure, all different things. So that tells us that though this revenue stream and project has been primarily focused on a golf course, the ballot language actually provides for significantly greater authorization for the use of that revenue stream of what is designated as a venue project. Under co-construction, if a word is not defined by statute, we have to interpret it based on the plain meaning of the word. And that is important because within this ballot language, we have some things that are defined by statute and some that are not. So we rely on the plain meaning in one instance and the statutory definition in another. We have, for example, related infrastructure is a defined term under Chapter 334 of the Local Government Code. So that provides us guidance as to what the inclusion of that term means. The other things, we have to rely upon general meaning of the word and what has been the historical designation of the city for a particular term in this particular context. The next slide. I'm on call-outs of the ballot language. Okay. The related infrastructure definition, it has not changed since 2000, since 2002, I'm sorry, and that is important because we would have to look at the law as it existed at the time the voters approved the proposition as to having controlling interest over this particular issue. And related infrastructure means any store, restaurant, on-site hotel, concession, automobile parking facility, area transportation facility, road, street, water, sewer facility, park, or other on-site or off-site improvement that relates to and enhances the use, value, or appeal of a venue, including areas adjacent to the venue and any other expenditure reasonably necessary to construct, improve, renovate, or expand a venue, including an expenditure for environmental remediation. And if you remember, the core projects that we identified were linear parks, open space, and municipal golf course. We also said a conference center. So when you look at those individual projects and then you pair related infrastructure with each of these, you look at this laundry list of what that can entail, and that shows you the breadth and scope of what authorized capital expenditures are actually going to fall under this ballot proposition. Next slide. Looking at this and understanding and being educated on some of the history, my personal experience and advice of what I'm providing tonight, and the first one that came to jump off the page to me is an interfund loan, an intergovernmental borrowing between the general fund to position or to pay to the golf course back in 2005, I believe. That is now a $1.9 million asset of the general fund. If you do not pay that off, and from an accounting perspective, you will have to write that off. You write it off as a liability on one side and an asset on the other, which would mean an accounting reduction of your general fund by $1.9 million. In my experience and seeing this in similar circumstances, that is not a prudent management of your expenditures or your assets and your liabilities. So I would tell you that from a prioritization perspective, particularly as you're paying off the existing debt and you have capacity under that revenue stream, before you extinguished it or repurposed it for something else, you need to pay back that interfund transfer with your money. Now what that will do is that will replenish your general fund with actual cash instead of an accounts receivable or an asset to be recovered, turning an illiquid or unavailable asset into a real one that can be deployed for any lawful purpose that you can spend general fund money on. So to me, that is an initial, immediate infusion of cash into your general fund that also improves and enhances the financial position of the city. I think that failure to pay this back would have a negative consequence to the city's financial position, just as you write off a $1.9 million asset and have to realize that in your statement, net financial position of your general fund. So I would say, for my recommendation, that should be priority one. Priority two would be general fund transfers, and what this means is that you have an asset that is identified as a venue project. It is intended to be self-sufficient and self-supporting, but from my understanding as to what happens is all of the revenue from the sales tax that is attributable to the venue project is transferred over to the golf course, to this project and conference center. What does not happen is the city does not realize a recoupment of the administrative expenses that it funds from another source but nevertheless applies that time, effort, resource to the management and operation of the venue project. And what I mean by that is a portion of Ms. Turner's time is spent on managing the golf course. So is other staff of the city. But is there a payback for salaries or for overhead that is attributable to maintaining that staff that is going to be supporting that venue project? If there's not, there should be. The way that we look at this is if you were to get rid of the city completely, you had no additional resources, and you had a standalone project, venue project, and I think that the business analogy is a good one that several members from the audience today have raised. What would that venue project have to pay in the form of services in order to operate? Anything that falls into that category becomes an authorized use of that sales tax revenue stream. The fact that it is paid for by the city out of services that are funded by the general fund means that the cost can be allocated to that project, and a portion of those sales taxes can be returned to the general fund in order to supplement that budget to pay for the time and effort of those employees and that overhead that is allocated to the venue project. This is a quick, easy, appropriate, justifiable, legally authorized expenditure of those sales tax proceeds that will again immediately support your general fund that can be used for other purposes that we'll talk about here in a second. And if you look at this, this slide, it tells just some ideas as to what city services are funded by the general fund but are nevertheless applied to the venue project, to include finance, public works, project management, insurance, legal, human resources and payroll, contract management, marketing, and janitorial. Priority 3 then is the golf course and venue project itself. This is a city asset, and I understand that there is a school of thought that you let this survive on its own. There are many services that are provided to communities that are not profitable, but nonetheless carry value because of the benefit that it provides a citizen. So I think that as long as you have an asset, my personal belief is you have an obligation to maintain that in a safe, usable format that is going to be a requirement for application of capital, whether that be operational revenue or some supporting measure. And that's what this indicates. You have an asset, as long as it's yours, you have an obligation to own, operate, and maintain in a safe and secure fashion. And these are things that have been identified by city staff as are going to be necessary improvements, to include upgrading the fiber to 200 megabytes per second, replace all computers, separate golf and event activities, relocate, construct golf pro shop, park bar, and ag courts, expand parking lot, dumpsters, enclosures, remodel the existing building, identify and repair course hazards and liabilities, course equipment, and course grounds. They're in greater detail here, but I won't read every word on this page. Priority 4 would be to exercise your council discretion. Exercise council discretion of using your venue tax as provided in the ballot language for some of those other things that we talked about. Are there pieces of your general fund that are currently supporting linear parks that could otherwise be spent with venue proceeds that are now excess, or in addition to the money that's available after paying for these other priorities, if those are in fact your priorities? If you do that and you pay these other things with the venue tax proceeds, then that again frees up more money in your general fund that you can use for other purposes. Venue tax would be used for, we have a 2023 Parks and Recreation budget of $950,000, for example. Venue tax could be used for some or all of the parks budget, and it can change from year to year depending on the priority of your needs. So if you put all of this together, we call this a trickle-down effect as to how can the venue tax under your current authorizations actually support your general fund and lead to immediate and identifiable solutions to your community for things like street repair. The use of venue tax proceeds for annual budgetary support of the general fund. So you repay your interfund borrowing. That brings more money into the general fund. You use venue tax proceeds to pay for venue project administrative services historically borne by the general fund. You can pay for other venue projects under the ballot language that we discussed that would again be used to supplement the general fund because you're no longer supporting them with your M&O tax. As a result, you're likely to have a general fund budgetary surplus that you can then use to fund capital items such as street repair on a pay-as-you-go basis. You could also use this to transfer to your INS side to pay for a portion of the debt service if you were to, for example, issue your $30 million of voter-approved debt for street repair, so that you don't have to then increase the ad valorem tax in as much of an amount as you would have otherwise if you didn't have that ability to transfer revenue from your general fund. So it is a way to flow all of this through in order to, what I would call, right-size something that has had a tenuous history of not being overly profitable, even including the revenue stream, to one that reflects the growth of your community and the sales tax that is generated by the 0.5% that is now 21 years old. These are things that can be done immediately. If you want to incorporate them over time, you have that ability. But what it does is it provides you the discretion to use this money on a host of different issues that perhaps before tonight you didn't realize that you had at your disposal. Thank you.
Okay, that's the formal presentation for this evening. And now it opens up for discussion. This is the opportunity now for council to address any or all of these issues that were brought before this evening. Various priorities came about. I think we all learned a few things. I hope you all did too. But it's not a simple issue. It's very complex. And when the city made the decision way back in the 90s to do this golf course project, we realized there's, we would hope that we've been very successful. And I think it's on its way, but it's had a lot of shortcomings over the years. But we have an asset, as I think Clay mentioned. We have an asset there, and we can't fix what happened years ago. We've got to try to take what we have now and make it work. I think we have a terrific asset in this golf course, because it leads to tremendous visibility for our community, not necessarily for you and I personally, well, me, because I'm a golfer, but the rest of you are not. But it does have some tremendous value for our city. And some of the developments that we've had that have come up in recent years would have never happened, in my opinion, if we did not have that golf course. And back in 2005, and I think one of you, Mr. Mitch or somebody mentioned, or Mr. Bruball, yes, I did. I talked about the option to lease or to buy, and I said, but my restriction, and I made it very, very clear in our discussions, was that it would only be for a golf course, not for anything else. And the original deed, and I don't know if you realize that most of this property, except for one parcel, was deeded to the Universal City, thankfully very much, and that allowed us to come up with this concept of what we can do. So that property was given to us, basically given to us, except for the one parcel that we purchased. And at one time, there was a small portion of it was in Selma, and that's where the 14, well, actually, right where it is now, that's where the Town Place Suites is. That's where that is. That was the only little portion. So there was a little swap you did, Selma and Universal City Insurance, to make sure that everything on the golf course was now under Universal City. So everything related to water, sewer, the services that we need to provide would not have to be shared amongst the cities. So that's just a little background for you. So I'm going to open up for discussion now for our council people, and we'll continue on this. Someone said, is this the end? The answer is absolutely not. This is a step that we're taking. We have plenty of time to come up with, we hope will be the positive direction that we need to go. If we finally choose to go to a vote, we don't have to make that decision until August. So we have plenty of time to really work on this. Is an issue that's going to face us, you citizens, us, all of us in the future. So we have to be careful in the decision we make. Everyone must be sure that we've come up with the right solution that's going to benefit everybody into the future. The past is gone. We can't redo the past. We can look at the present, but we got to look at the present for what it's going to be for us in the future. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox and open it up for everybody. Discussion, anybody?
I was trying to defer to my senior members on council.
Mr. Buck, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions for the legal counsel and for Ms. Turner, our city manager. How much would it cost us, because you mentioned we could spare ourselves the cost of holding an election in November. How much would it cost, give or take, for Universal City to put this on the ballot in November if we were to move forward in that direction? We don't know the answer to that. It would be, it would depend on how many other entities were conducting an election in November. You would have it conducted by the Bexar County Elections Administrator, and it would be dependent on who all went out at that same point in time, calling bond elections, however much, and then you would identify the pro rata cost based on the number of machines and polling locations, and then that cost would be allocated to each of the participating members. I mean, to think that it would be less than $100,000 would probably be a good estimate for an end of year size. That's just a rough guess.
I'll try to play like, is it bigger or smaller than a bread box game? I think everybody's familiar with that. For reference, how much is it costing us this year for our city council elections?
I'm not looking at Mr. Vaughan, I'm looking behind Mr. Vaughan, I don't know.
Yeah, so traditionally anywhere between 7 and 17,000. It just depends, like he said, who's on the ballot, and our pro rata share. So, traditionally between 7 and 17. That's just for our council member elections typically. The bond election that we did, is the higher end.
Okay. Thank you. Back in 2002, the residents of Universal City were faced with a tough decision. Nobody disputes that. The golf course wasn't doing as well as had been hoped, as well as had been expected. The residents were asked to approve an additional half-cent sales tax in the form of the venue tax. According to the Texas Attorney General's opinion number GA0156 from 2004, an election of that type, when a municipality designates a venue project, creates a contract with the residents, as it were. The language from the ballot, the very first thing that was in there was adoption of an additional 0.5% to pay for the reimbursement of the bonds issued in order to fund the golf course approximately 5 years earlier. I personally feel like the residents of Universal City entered into a contract with the city to allocate that half-cent of sales tax and designate it as a venue tax. The number one priority, the stated number one priority of that venue tax was to repay the debt that we incurred to fund the construction of the golf course. The contract, as far as most people I believe are concerned, has now been completed, right? Ms. Turner knows that I'm an analogies type of person. There is additional language in that ballot measure that, yes, technically would allow us to continue with the venue tax and allocate it to other revenue, or to other areas of the city, specifically to fund some of those activities that are traditionally covered by the general fund, i.e. salaries, maintenance of the trucks that are used to perform work on the golf course facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But we could also fund those priorities through the general fund. It's my belief that if we continue to pull in the venue tax and spend it on other areas within the city that could/should be funded by the general fund, we're engaging in what a lot of people would call government manipulation of the money and loopholes, and, well, technically we're still complying with the ballot language from 2002, and I don't dispute that we would be I'm not saying that we would not be in compliance with the ballot language, but I do believe that the residents were asked to enter into that contract. If we continue to pull the venue tax, I almost feel like it would be, we gave the bank an authorization to pay the money for our car loan out of our checking account. And once that car has now been paid off, the bank continues to pull that money from our bank account and says, well, you need new tires for your car, and you need to replace the shocks, and you could sure use a brake job. I understand that that language is in the ballot, in the measure from 2002, and I don't dispute that that would be legal for us to do, for council to make that decision. However, given that we entered into the so-called contract in 2002 with the residents and stated that the primary function of that venue tax would be to fund the repayment of the golf course debt and those bonds that were issued, I feel that before we do that, we should ask the residents if that's what they wish to continue to do. Now, if we ask the residents, do you wish to reallocate that half-cent to another form of tax within Universal City, I would propose either street maintenance or additional funding for the general fund. Both of those items
are still going to be coming into the universal city coffers. We can use that money that comes into the general fund to continue funding those much-needed repairs, renovations, and additions at the golf course. But I also believe that the golf course should be placed on the same level as some of our other facilities within Universal City that are potentially discretionary spending. When I say discretionary spending, police, fire, safety, infrastructure, those items are non-negotiable. That's not discretionary spending. We have to pay for our police, our fire, for our sewer, water upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. But if I look at the splash pad, the library, the animal shelter, those are all things that are used by a small portion of our community. One could legitimately make an argument that the golf course is only funding a certain segment of our population. I don't believe that that is an inaccurate statement. But I could also argue that the library only serves a small portion of our community. Do I advocate for the elimination of the golf course? Certainly not. I'm sorry, do I advocate for the elimination of the library or the animal shelter? Certainly not. But I feel like the golf course, now that those bonds have been paid off and the original purpose of the the venue tax has been accomplished, that we now consider placing the golf course on an even playing field, haha, see what I did there, with the other facilities in Universal City, so that we can consider their funding needs along with all of the other funding needs for the other activities, facilities in Universal City that require funding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My throat's dry as the drinks.
Point of clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sure you're going to respond. I just want to make sure this, I think there was two questions in there. One is, if you moved all of the venue tax over to just a regular sales and use tax and used it in the general fund, then could it be used to make repairs and fund the golf course? I believe that was your first question.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I lost track of what your second question was. What was your second question?
I think they were rhetorical questions, actually.
I think your first question was, I'm sorry, I wrote it down, was the number one issue on the ballot for the construction on the debt service.
To repay the bonds, yes, ma'am.
Of the bonds, and I don't know if that's a question for you.
No, I do, and you very well spoken. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said. It's a policy issue. I do think that the one caveat that I would say is on the interfund transfer, the borrowing is a borrowing that I think is in addition to the bonds themselves, and it was debt that was incurred by the city, self-funded debt, but debt nonetheless. And if you were to ask me what would be my strong advice would be to pay that back before you did any extinguishment of the revenue stream.
Yes, sir. Notice that I specifically left that portion out of my soliloquy. I will leave that to my more qualified colleague to discuss the numbers and whether or not those transfers. I'll speak to policies and stuff like that. I'll let Mr. Vaughan, I suspect, will have.
Can you legally use sales tax, not venue tax, sales tax to support a venue tax? And can you legally use
To support a venue project.
A venue project, thank you. And can you use ad valorem tax to support a venue project?
Right, and so if you eliminate this as a revenue stream, you have a voted venue project. Nonetheless, in 2002, that was the qualification when it was voted by the electorate. There is a prohibition under 334 of the local government code, which is the venue statute, that says that you cannot use ad valorem tax to support a venue project unless it is specifically voted or it is part of a park system. Park system to me is that it is designated as a park. So you haven't done that, so I would say that an ad valorem tax transfer from your general fund is prohibited for the golf course because, go ahead.
I was going to say, can we clarify for everybody that ad valorem includes sales tax and not just property tax?
Yes. No, ad valorem is only property tax. So sales tax, if we voted sales tax for street maintenance and we reallocated this 0.5% for street maintenance, it would not also be an eligible use of that sales tax under that proposition.
Yes.
Okay. If you voted it for ad valorem property tax reduction, then I believe it would be eligible to be used under that context. Now, there are some limitations when you revote sales tax for general fund support. For example, street maintenance sales tax cannot be used to support debt service, whether that be self-supporting debt or actually debt secured by the sales tax. I believe the same is true for a general sales tax transfer. I would have to check on that to confirm, depending on what source of law you wanted to pursue. But you should not assume that you could use any of the sales tax transfers to support debt that's issued and secured by another source, such as your ad valorem tax pledge.
Yes, sir. Could we use, if the council were to reallocate that portion of the venue tax as an example, half of that, which would be 1/4 cent to the general fund and 1/4% to the street maintenance, could we use that 1/4% that goes into the general fund, that is for all operations in Universal City, including those operations at the golf course? Is that correct?
I believe we would have one. I caveat all of these answers from the dais or from the podium as saying I would want to confirm that legally. But I believe the answer to that is yes. But you would then have to track those revenues separately to make sure that you are not using something that is legally prohibited from that particular purpose.
Yes, sir. We certainly don't want that. Right. Very well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Next, anyone? Bill, you're on.
So, Mr. Bicker, I have a couple questions for you. You mentioned you just said that we're not designated as a park, the golf course, right? So that there was some limitations on that. So is that simple for us to just designate it as a park?
It's not. If you designate it as a park, then if you ever want to transfer it, it has to be voted by the public before you can actually divest yourself of it. It becomes legally protected under law. To where you have very limited opportunities as to what you want to do with it. Now, you can designate it as a park, but you're now coming in doing that after the formulation of that contract with the voters. So you can't impose upon those voters a contract that they didn't have the benefit of at inception. And even if you did that, you would have to be worried about the law of unintended consequences, that if you wanted to try to go and sell it at some point down the road, even though it can only be used for a golf course pursuant to the deed restrictions, you would first have to have a public vote before you could do that. So it's not as simple as doing that. If you designated it, you would then have the ability, perhaps under a new election, for some flexibilities, but it would also come with some handouts.
Thank you. And then on the street sales tax, if we had a street sales tax, and this is off the cuff, so you weren't prepared for this, so feel free to say no, or you don't have to answer, but can that be used to pay debt service on a maintenance bond?
Cannot. It cannot. Specifically says that a street maintenance tax has to be revoted once every 4 years.
Well, it can't be as security for the bonds.
No, it also cannot be used to pay debt service. It's the other way. So and that is used as not only a prohibition on the transfer, but it doesn't actually say it can't be used to secure debt. It says it can't be used to pay debt. So there's an interpretation by the Attorney General's office that says that extends to we cannot pay and we cannot pledge. It's the more comprehensive of the two.
Okay. On priority one, you were talking about the interfund loan, $2.4 million. But on the 2021 audit, which is the most recent financial we have, were you aware that the golf course also has $1.5 million in the bank and a receivable from other funds of $1.9 million? So there's a total of $3.4. Would that change your opinion if the golf course had enough money to pay off that interfund as of 9/30/21? Would that?
If they actually did it, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that was mentioned previously was, or not tonight, but to me previously, was in 2002 when we passed the venue tax, that like the linear park had to be in existence at that time. Is that true or is that not true?
We would have to go back and study a little bit more. It could be a linear park system that could be added to over time, which would go back. It depends on if you actually had a park plan or if you had identified linear parks at that particular point in time. If you had no other linear parks and you had no designs on actually creating a linear park system, I would probably tell you that word is not effective for purposes of utilization of the revenue. If you had a linear park system and if you had a plan for adding to it, I suppose you could possibly do that, but I'd have to think about that a little bit.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, one question. So there is a distinction between open spaces and linear parks?
Yes, there is.
Can you explain that definition real quick?
Sure. Parks has a particular connotation under state law, and that is the one that I just described. Open space is space that's generally available to the public, but does not rise to the level of designation as a park. So an open space would be a common area practice field or an amateur soccer field for children to play soccer on or something of that nature. Would you designate a golf course as an open space? Could you still charge fees for access to use an open space? I think you start running into some trouble if you try to call it open space for purposes of one issue, again, unintended consequences. Can you still charge card fees or admission fees? I would say you probably have trouble doing that.
I have one more question for Mr. Binford, and then I'll just close my comments. If you also, so one of your strategies also was to keep the venue tax, but then charge like an overhead to the golf course fund. If I would assume that needs to pass a reasonableness test as well. Like if the golf course budget's $2 million, you can't charge it $4 million in overhead.
Of course not.
Is that right?
Right, and I just want to clarify that because I think that that's something that should have been done at inception. I don't think that that's something that, and I appreciate what you're saying, technically we should not do this. I would say technically you should have been doing it since 2002. And the fact that it hasn't been done before means that the general fund, the $1.9 million liability should probably be something significantly greater because of the services that have inured to the benefit of the golf course. So when I hear $17 million of sales tax transfer, I think that's missing a piece of this, and that's services. Services that have been provided for this asset, services that the asset should have been paying out of the revenue streams available to it from whatever source. So I think we would look at I think that if you were to pursue this, you would take a survey of staff and you would say, how much of your time is allocated to management of this asset? And if it's 50%, then I would look at it and make sure that people documented their time so that you had a trail as to how you would support that in audit. And then you would allocate the cost, not a markup or something looking to try and extract a larger amount of money into the general fund that's disproportionate to the actual cost to the city. It's not a profit center. It is to supplement the actual expenditure of resources that are applied to that asset. And that should be documented, and it should be transferred, and it should be matched to the particular service for which it's delivered.
Right, so 1.6 million as an indirect charge to the golf course, if their budget's 2.1, probably wouldn't be reasonable. Would that be a fair statement?
I agree, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
I just want to say that thank you to the residents. You guys knocked it out of the park tonight. I'm very impressed. Everybody got up there and spoke. It was awesome. To me, this is really not about the golf course. The staff's done a great job getting it to where it covers its costs, and none of us want to get rid of the golf course. This is really a question about our structure of revenue. Do we want a dedicated tax revenue to go to the golf course, which is a want, not a need? If we're going to have a dedicated tax revenue, I think it should go to one of our needs, which is infrastructure, public safety, something like that. We've asked all of our residents to go into debt for streets so that the golf course can keep its sales tax, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think that it's time that we move this back to a street maintenance sales tax. It doesn't mean we need to get rid of the golf course. We can talk about how we're going to pay for the golf course, but the golf course is actually in good shape. I mean, it's covering its costs, and it's meeting its obligations. Yes, there's capital needs that the city has identified that I think we can fund through some of the surpluses from the golf course. But even if we can't, if there's a big number that needs to go to the golf course, which is a want, that should definitely go to the citizens. And if we're afraid to go to the citizens and ask them, what do you want to do with this money, then we're probably doing something wrong. And I think the only reason not to convert this into a street maintenance sales tax is because we're worried that we pull this away and then the golf course won't have the funding that it needs to keep operating. And if we're worried about that, we're worried about it because the citizens are going to tell us no if we ask for a bond. And future councils are going to say no on giving the golf course more money. Well, if that's the case, then that's the will of the people, and we should abide by that. So I don't think we should be afraid of that. Right now, with the venue tax, the golf course is not accountable to any of the voters. It's a dedicated tax revenue, so it can do what it wants, when it wants. The voters can't say anything. We can't even really say anything because all that money goes straight to the golf course. It's time to return that to the general fund and make it an annual budget process where we fund our needs first, and then if we have extra money, we can give it to the golf course. And we want to keep the golf course running, we want to make it profitable, and there should be plans for that, business plans later to make that happen, but Right now, it's just a discussion on the venue tax, which I think is time. So, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. All right. Mr. Neville?
Yeah. When I was younger, I had great eyesight. I could read a street sign that was 50 yards away. I can't do that now. I wish we had that foresight way back then, because we thought, and the citizens thought, that we wouldn't have a great day. We never expected that it would happen. We never expected that big flood. We never expected wild boars to come in, federal pond, come in, wipe out 2 holes. So we had to have our police chief have permission from a helicopter to shoot them. That's the only way we got rid of them. Now, what we need to do now is use what we have and not look at foresight now. And we can't go back with hindsight, because that never solves anything. What we have to do is what we have, take here and now, make decisions that affect us in a very, very positive way. Whatever that takes, I'm ready to do it. And I think all of us are.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, piggybacking on what Phil said, there was a lot of great comments earlier from everybody, and one of them that sticks out in my mind is that this is a discussion tonight. This isn't, we're not making these decisions tonight. This is an ongoing discussion. What was brought to us tonight was eye-opening, and then what was brought after the presentation, wow, that's even more stuff to consider. So, everybody keeps asking me, Bear, what was your plan? What's your plan for the venue tax? My original plan was hoping that we could continue the venue tax for a couple of years to provide the upgrades that the golf course needs, because years ago, when we first got on this council, there was in the red. We see it every year getting better. It's in the black. Wow, the plans that we set as an architect, I walked through the golf course with not my client, but a client, and look at it through their eyes and see what they need. There's some upgrades, there's some facilities that could be added. We've had people come in here to council and be frustrated that they didn't feel like they belonged at the golf course. Well, first off, that's their issue. Second, because everybody belongs at the golf course. Second, there are some things that we could do. There are some ideas that we threw out there to play at the golf course that makes it to where it feels more like a family environment for everybody. But whether that happens or not, that's a discussion that we will continue to have, or somebody else will continue to have. But hearing what we can do with the venue tax to move forward, I really want more of that legal side of it, because if you can turn it and move it to help with the parks, that's the part I'm not totally grasping at the moment, is how much of that can go into funding, the parks side of this, funding the public works side of this, with streets and things that access this. Councilmember Buck discusses that this is a contract entered into with the citizens back then whenever it was approved. And was really focusing on the language there. I'm still seeing it as that park aspect. But again, as Phil states, that this is something that we can put in the general fund, and we can start to look at our needs versus our wants. And I appreciate that as well. So my original plan is definitely getting the whole shot into it, but I mean, I don't want to rush into these decisions. I hope everybody has seen that this is a very complex issue. So let's keep talking about it. I hope we have more of these discussions going forward. I know there's people that want us to make a decision tonight. We're not going to do it. This needs to be thought through, because there are ramifications to not thinking it through and working through it. So I do want to understand more about the 1 point whatever million that the golf course owes the city, and make sure that we don't hit ourselves with a financial speed bump in the future.
And thank you. For the benefit of you hearing that feedback, what I would do is work with staff and see we have a $950,000 park budget number. What does that entail? What is the anticipated use of those funds? What did the park system look like in 2002? And were there any statements around supporting parks as they existed or as they might exist in the future at that point in time? And if we can do a little bit more background looking on those issues, then we'll be able to provide you a better answer so you can make a better decision.
And I'll ask this question even though I know the answer. Randy, did we have a parks master plan in 2002?
Yes, we did.
Yes, okay, so that's where we'll start.
Because it's just, it's not a cut and dry. It's not, as Councilmember Shelby said, it's not a light switch. I don't want to just turn it off. I want us to make sure that we have everything worked through, because again, legal counsel's here tonight. Councilmember Vaughan is able to, go back and forth with the certain aspects that raise more questions. So every time there's more questions, but I do believe that this eventually needs to go back to the citizens. Is it this November? Possibly. More than likely. I don't know. I want to know more about our 1 point whatever debt that we need to pay back before we make that decision. Before I make that decision. So that's all I have.
Well, I think that's a key issue to bring up there, is that interfund loan. I think it's imperative that we consider that as a must. As a must do. We really need to do that, and how that's done. I think that can be worked out, because it's clearly could have a negative consequence on the city in the long term if that interfund loan is not paid back, which I think we all come to the conclusion that we agree with that. So that's an issue certainly that we're faced with as well. Definitely. So, Mr. Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2002, what was the sales tax rate?
In 2002, well, when this was...
Combined with the county?
Oh,
2%.
2%.
So that's why I'm asking about the language. We didn't add sales tax, we reallocated existing sales tax. That's why I'm trying to get the correct answer on that one.
Okay.
Was it 825 or was it 775?
So initially, when the city started out with its sales tax, the city had 1% going to the general fund. He's asking me to speak at the podium. Thank you, Mr. Buck. Initially, the city had a 1%, right? The state had 6.25%. And then the cities have the option to go up to a cap of 2%. So you took 1/2 of your other 1%, and that went to the venue tax, and then the voters approved the 1/2 of 1% for economic development. And that's your combined 2%. That's your cap. It's the cap all cities have.
So that's what I'm trying to find out. In 2002, was the tax rate 725, 775, or 825?
Well, it would have been, I have to figure out, one was in 97 and the other one, I don't know which one happened first at this point, whether it was golf or EDC, but we were at 1%.
But regardless, prior to the venue tax being added to sales tax, that half cent didn't exist.
Correct.
So if anybody's spending money, not living, spending money in the city of Universal City, had an increase of an extra half cent for every dollar they spent inside the city.
1/2 of 1%, yes.
Right, so half a penny.
Yes.
Okay, so if I paid $1 for something, it cost me half a penny of sales tax. Okay, so we added that in 2002.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. I understood. Do we charge sales tax at the golf course?
Yes.
So the golf course generates sales tax revenue as well?
And on golf as well.
I'm sorry?
On both food and beverage and golf services
And events?
and golf merchandise.
And events?
Yes.
So the full cost of the event gets sales tax, not just the,
Unless it's a tax, like if it's a tax-free organization.
right, so I know sometimes services are not taxable.
No,
So-
everything is taxed.
Okay, so if somebody spends $10,000 at the golf course for an event, they're gonna pay 2% of that, right, 2% of that's gonna go back to the city as sales tax. 1 cent goes to the city general fund, half a cent of that goes to the EDC, and a half a cent of that goes back into the venue tax.
Correct.
Okay, cool. How many of our parks generate revenue? How many of our parks generate revenue?
Parks don't generate revenue, they're a public service.
Okay.
A public
And
asset.
I know the answer to the question, I just wanted to ask it out loud. Thank you. So our parks don't generate revenue, and not everybody in the city uses our parks. And yet, we use property tax to build, maintain, repair, expand, add bathrooms, water fountains, build a splash pad, right? That all comes out of our property tax. Or we get a bond for it and it comes out of
General
our,
fund revenue, which would be ad valorem
and a little bit of
possibly
mixture of,
sales tax.
okay,
All your user fees.
okay. And the golf course generates revenue.
Yes.
So while it didn't generate enough revenue to pay its debt, and while there were a large amount of golf courses in the county, it was having a difficult time generating enough revenue to pay its debt, having enough golfers come in and play the course. And over time, and at the time I believe when it was built, we weren't doing weddings or any kind of events.
No, sir, when the golf course was built, it was never intended to do weddings and events. It was it had the conference room, but it was to be used for tournaments. It had the bar and grill, which was for after, but there was no intention of using it for any other type of events. It wasn't until Katie was brought in 10 years ago. She just had her anniversary 10 years ago that we actually started building up the wedding and event portion of the facility.
Okay, so these are also things that we didn't see as a possibility of happening when the golf course was built, as an opportunity to increase the revenue stream for the golf course. Let's see, where else was I going with this?
He also didn't anticipate having community events at the golf course. We didn't have happy hours either.
Which also generates sales
Right,
tax.
we've had the Easter egg hunt there. We have the toga run. Regina, what other events have we had there? Father-daughter dance, mother-son dances, movies in the park, midnight movies, luau's, the flashlight walks, whatever else Regina has put her crazy little head to. Those were not planned for the golf course as well, that we've incorporated over time.
Okay, so if we have done a great job of building up our customer base, golf courses in the city have a lot of them, there have been several amount of them that have closed. Some on the road, some others, which has reduced the amount of places to play golf in the city, which has increased demand on our golf course, which we are seeing, which is great. So the golf course has the opportunity to make more money than it has in the past. If we don't have a good way of maintaining and or improving the existing golf course, it will just continue to age and fall apart just like any other park in the city that, as we didn't have money to pay for a park to be repaired, it aged, swing sets start rusting. Nobody, like, there's a set of, I'm not even sure if they're still there at UC Park, that were probably the original swing sets at the entrance. Are they gone finally?
They're gone.
Okay. Awesome. But that's the point. I mean, in this discussion and these decisions, you know, I talked about, thank you for reminding me of the light switch analogy. This is a multi-million-dollar business. And you can't make decisions about what we're going to do with funding that is there to support it on emotion and quick math and what's going to happen in the next 6 months. We do need to be thinking about what we're going to do with the golf course over the next 10 or 20 years. Because if we're going to make quick, snap decisions, we might as well just close the doors and lock them. I mean, if we're going to make quick decisions, we might as well just shut it down and walk away. Nobody wants to do that. So let's slow down, calm down, and I really mean it. You guys have got to calm down. I don't post on your social media, but oh my Lord, I really do. Calm down. Okay?
All right, Taylor.
This is something that has to be thought out. And as if everybody said, I've had 5 different people get up and give 5 different numbers, 5 different amounts of, huge amounts of money that have been spent on the golf course. 12 million, 19 million, 24 million. I mean, what are we playing? The Price is Right? I want to make decisions on real numbers. I want to make decisions without emotion. And I want to make decisions that look at the long-term success of the golf course. Because otherwise, we might as well just shut it down. It owes the general fund money. It needs to pay the general fund back. If the city staff is spending that much time supporting it, and I know the city staff is spending time supporting it, and we're able to document that, account for it, and then collect it, we are effectively getting our staff paid back, and the money is coming into the city, and it can be used for general fund revenues. If there's things we want to get in parks, we want to get parks done, and there's extra money, let's get it done. Otherwise, I mean, getting into the light switch, let's just get rid of the pass-in sales tax altogether. Don't put it back in the general fund. It was never there to begin with. We created it for the venue tax. We could play devil's advocate all night long. There is a lot to be talked about here, but without thinking this through, looking at the numbers, losing the emotion, and making an appropriate decision for the long term, we're going to make a bad choice. And in 10 years, we're going to be back where we were in 2002 going, everything's falling apart, and now we have to either start pulling money out of the general fund to pay for it, which nobody wants to do. I mean, that's the big thing. Nobody wants the property taxes going towards it. And it comes in the same situation, and I'm not going to have you re-explain it, but can it even happen? Can we start putting money out of the general, money out of the general fund to pay for it if the law says it, we can't? Now we have to go back and reintroduce another venue tax to support it again, or shut the doors and lock them. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me take a few things that Mr. Williams brought up too. When I got on this council, we have our regular, excuse me, we have our regular 5-year plan that we go through that we come up with what we're going to do each 5 years. And our city manager at the time was Ken Taylor. When I first came on, he got us together and was talking about not only 5, we need to start thinking 10, 20, 30 years into the future. When a lot of us aren't around anymore, but what's best for the city of Universal City in the long run, for a lifetime, for other people's lifetime, for a kid's lifetime. And I took that to heart. So when things came up like the restructuring, what we were going to do with the aviation district, our long-term plan there to bring that up and to bring people out and to modernize that, we got on board. And I've looked at saying, and talked to people saying, down the future, there's going to be that area there. I've heard a lot of people say that the golf course itself, and I can see the logic in that, people said, we bring people to the golf course and they'll go through the city and spend their tax dollars. But where it's located, sometimes those people don't make it into the city. And I could see that too, saying, so, yeah, but once like the aviation district comes up and you've got a viable property like a golf course going, people will be going to the golf course and saying, hey, you know that new venue down here in the aviation district? We got to go there after we finish our round of golf. And it does bring it to the city. And it will generate more money. These type of discussions are fantastic. I've learned a lot from, the financial language. Believe it or not, I've learned a lot from you too. Some of those numbers over my head, but at the same time, we want to do what's right for the city. And I always say that if we are short-sighted in our thinking, it will only harm us in the long run. As Mr. Binford had put it, the golf course is an asset and it should continue to be funded. Now I'm at the point now where you don't want to get rid of the venue tax and do something else with it. You know what? I'm all for changes. There are lots of things that, again, we've talked about that. Things are changing. There's new ways we can do things with the money. If it takes putting things back in the general fund, I don't care how it's funded. This is going to be my point, though. We don't want to think short-sighted. We do have time on this issue. My big issue is the golf course. You have the golf course, you have food and beverage, and you have conference. Before, we have places where my father and stepmother, Northcliffe, that went down. Northcliffe is a golf course. A lot of these golf courses that are going out of business are golf courses that would just get their funding from rounds of golf. And that didn't cover it. They went under. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Northcliffe area. I am, because like I said, my parents live out there. It got discussed. Property values have gone down. People are in an uproar. What used to be the golf course is shoddy at best. I see for sale signs all over that. To me, that's short-sighted. They might have been able to. I don't know. I don't want to say it for that community itself, but was it Woodcliff out in Woodland? Thank you very much. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. Used to be a beautiful golf course. Now it's a place that people walk out there too. Also, houses get robbed out there too from people coming in the back. Property values also out there have gone down. There's for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, as they say. Now, for the future of Universal City, I say the asset in our golf course, when people say, and I understand, hey, put them on a level footing. If the golf course can't make money itself, and it dies out. It dies out. If that's what happens, that's the way it is. That's the way America is. Let's think of it, if that dies out, and we say, okay, it could make money, that golf course, most of that golf course, if I'm right, is in a flood zone. We really couldn't do anything with it as far as building on it, am I correct? If we turned it into a park, we'd still have to maintain it. It wouldn't generate any money. It would just be taking money, am I correct? So the golf course itself might not pay for itself. This is where our asset comes in. We don't have just a golf course. And I urge you all not to think of it as just a golf course. We have a golf course. We have food and beverage. And thank you very much for your farsightedness. We have started getting into the black because of that. And The weddings we have out there, we have golfing events. And if I'm right, again, things that keep that golf course making money might not be the rounds itself. So the rounds are finite. You can add it up. There's only so many rounds you can do in a day. You're going to have weather, but there's a number, and I'm not sure exactly what that number is. Somebody said it before, but it will can only make a specific amount of money. But the food and beverage has been very important. The weddings have been very important. People say, well, we can still have the weddings. If there's not a golf course, there's not going to be any reason to have a wedding out there. The problem we're seeing now is that we're getting very popular. We just found out we are the 3rd best golf course in San Antonio. That's nothing to, we're proud of that. That's something to be proud of. We're coming up. We've been put in magazines of having a fantastic wedding venue. We have golfing events. The problem we're having is because of the facility, the age of the facility, the size of the facility, things that need to be upgraded, we can't have a couple of events together. Am I correct? There's just not enough room. You got a wedding on one day, you can't have a golfing event. And I say, why not? We want to make money with this golf course, and I'm not opposed at all down the line of taking away all the funding and letting it on its own because of that fact. If we have that's a 3-pillar thing. We have the golf course, we have food and beverage, we have the facilities to do the weddings and golfing events. We have a brand new hotel out on our only 35 because we have a golf course. Let's go to them later. If we neglect it, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's why I say, which was not popular at the time, probably isn't that popular now, is instead of thinking of ways we can take funding away from the golf course, we need to add funding in there to upgrade, and I'm saying even possibly put another structure or add to the structure we have to where we can have more than one event at a time and keep profitable. Now I'm going to go into the other side, because that's the 3rd pillar. Golf is on itself, I think, and it's like horse racing. I figured in the long run, no, that is not going to be enough to make that sufficient. And again, if the golf course dies, what's going to happen to down the line? Property values, things start going down. You start complaining about the taxes on your homes now. It's like that gets run down. Property values will start going down too. And it's like, don't worry about the property taxes because that is a trickle down effect that will make it to the rest of Universal City. I'm just trying to think towards the future. If we have a fantastic venue on this side, we have a fantastic venue working on aviation. It makes Universal City a destination area. So it's short-sighted. I'm all for changing the way we fund. Give me some, let's go through these workshops and we take our time to find out the right way to fund it, but let's not let go of that asset. We make that asset better than anything around. We make it a destination spot. And that helps everybody in Universal City for now and in the future. We've got costs coming up that even if we're just getting into the black now, if we let it off by itself. Correct me, Mr. Stern. Or anybody knows this, the grass on a golf course, we were going through this before last, 25 years, and we're at 22?
20 years, typically we're at 23.
Okay, typically we're at 23. Any money, even if we get into the profit, we're making profit, and we take away, I don't think the amount of profit that the golf course in the short run will be enough to fund a venture of changing all that grass out. I don't know what the cost would be there, but it's got to be pretty enormous.
It's expensive.
It's expensive. Upgrading the kitchen facilities, that would be so greatly needed there. The building itself, there's lots of things to be doing. But there isn't any room on that property for expansion. There isn't any room to expand that parking lot, to do things that will make it profitable in the future. I am like you. The golf course should be able to fund itself. But it will fund itself when we have those three pillars together. Food and beverage, golf course, conference or event center, whatever you want to call it. We upgrade those that are making the money for the golf course. And that will be a viable property in the future that we can all be proud of. But cutting off all the funding now would be short-sighted and I would believe be very detrimental to the community in the long run. But again, through all this, again, I'm not against getting rid of the venue, calling it whatever you want. I am against cutting off funding, badly needed funding, to expand and do what we need to do with the golf course and event center in the future to make it a viable property. And through this, we have time to be able to figure that. I have no clue what I'm talking about, or that we can take the time to make sure that we do it right. Whether we take it to the people, whether we use the powers that are given to the council to be able to make those decisions. And if it goes out to people, I just want the people to know it's not just a golf course closing or just barely making it on its own. It's what it's going to do to the rest of the community in the long run, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, long term is obviously what's very important.
Yes.
There's many needs, golf course being one of those needs, streets being another need, there are all kinds of needs that we have. And that's what we're here to try, is to make that decision on your behalf, to make sure that we do provide the best services we can for our community, whether something comes out to you for a vote in this November or next May, whenever it is, that's something that this council is going to deliberate and make those recommendations, and we'll press on from there. So we still have time for discussion.
Thanks, sir. So what does the process, the question was asked, what does the process look like? So, I mean, do we have more of these types of meetings on a Tuesday night to have this discussion, to gain more information, legally as to what the requirements that we should fulfill are? Is there money in the account to fulfill those without the venue tax? Those types of questions, to get more answers on the park definition. How do we, a minute ago I said, 10 minutes ago Paul was worried. I said, I want to make sure we have all the information. I think everybody has said that. We want to know all of the information before we before we make a decision. What does that process look like? How, going forward?
Well,
Look at me, so.
We'll continue on with this process, and I can hopefully answer that question, is that it's an ongoing, and to say this, let's set this as the deadline, I don't think that's fair. I think we need to continue to look at it. We got some priorities presented to us tonight, and I think that we can take a look at those. And as far as what the next step is to continue the dialogue. I don't want us to get into setting a timeline as to where we want to be in the next month or the next month and a half, whatever. I think it's important for us to look at every issue, and the long term is clearly it, and let's not make any hasty decisions. And I think every one of us does not want to do that. Absolutely, because we want to make sure we do what's right for not now, but for not just now, but down into the future as well. And I think we all totally agree with that. And so that's why we asked for this particular session tonight, and had some legal counsel here to present some of those issues, because some of them are certainly have legal ramifications. And so we've got to make sure whatever decision we make, that is the correct one legally as well. And so we're not putting ourselves behind the bar by making a decision that may not even be legally palatable. Okay, so we're still on, so Bear, I appreciate that. That's exactly, our next step is to continue the process. And whether that means another meeting in 2 weeks, whatever, continuing the discussion as a discussion item in the next council meeting, that's certainly I think I would recommend that we do, that we don't put any cutoff dates on it. We continue to pursue it. And you guys tonight, great, really appreciate you coming. It's terrific feedback that we get. It's really helpful. Kim, you want to do it, then I'll turn it over to William again.
Yeah, I'm going to tag on to Mr. Goolsby because, that's the question in your staff's mind too. Given kind of what you've heard tonight, what you've thought before, what we've discussed before, if you could give us some direction of what you want the next step to be, we'll start to prepare for that, but we're not going to do anything unless you give us some kind of direction, because remember, we're here to carry out the will of the council, and so if you could help us out with that, if you want to have more discussion and set up a meeting, we'll look for a date. If you want to look at some of the priorities that have been brought up by your bond counsel tonight, you need to let us know so that we can start working on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. Well, that leads me into the question I was going to ask anyway. There were several items that were brought up where, and I apologize, I forgot your name.
Mr. Binford?
Mr. Binford mentioned that he would have to go back and take a look at. And I don't know if we clearly defined, yes, we do want you to go look back at that. And I wasn't taking notes. I hope somebody else was. But I think we should review that, the open space question. Everything that was brought up where you mentioned, hey, I need to go look into that. I think that should be the next conversation. Everything we mentioned, the money that's owed back to the city, the money that's sitting in the golf course apparently has a surplus. I want to identify that. Is that the case? Is that surplus there for a reason? Are we doing the same thing with the golf course that we should be doing as individuals and as the city and having a rainy day fund so that the golf course doesn't have a problem? We go, oh crap, we got to get money out of it somewhere. Where do we get it from to deal with this? Or we'll go borrow it again, put the golf course back in debt to deal with it. You pay off your house, and then you start saving up for all the stuff that you've been putting off while you've been making those payments for the last 25, 15, 25, 30 years. Now it's time to start fixing it. But before you start fixing it, I want to make sure I got enough money in case something really bad happens. And I would imagine we would want to do the same thing with the golf course, is making sure it's in the black, its debts are paid, it's stuff that has been being put off for the last however many years while we've been paying the debt is identified clearly. This is the first time I've heard about the debt. I knew there was some debt, I just didn't know what the number was back to the general fund. Are we 100% sure that is the exact number? Is there not more money that's owed back to the general fund that we just haven't identified yet? I think this should all be on the list for the next conversation so that we really, really understand where the golf course and conference center lies as financially. Because we can't make it, like I've said, I'm going to repeat myself. We cannot make a decision without all the information. At least not a good one.
Mr. Chairman.
Real quickly, as far as direction, I would be saying first, take a little time digesting this. Mr. Binford answering a couple of those questions, so we do have all the information, like I said. And I, for one, would like to continue a discussion or try to get some action going sooner than later on getting that 1.9 paid back to the general fund before we come up with the idea of where we're going to go with everything else. I think that should be, you were talking about that would be a great idea, which I agree. Make sure that's all off the table before we go on to whatever we're going to do in the next stage. But I would think the discussion on the 1.9 and that would be something we should be working on sooner than later.
Well, we've got some priorities that were presented to us tonight, 1 through 4, and I would ask council to take a look at those priorities and see where if you are agreeing with some of them, can we mix and match them? I totally agree that first priority should be one of our top issues to cut back what we need to, because I think that's important for us, for our fiscal well-being in the future, to do that. And then what to do with the venue tax is important. I think we all agree we don't want to lose the golf course. The question is if we've got an asset there, we want to make sure that that asset produces the way we want it to produce. And there are things that are whether we want or need. I think we need them, but that's not an item for debate. But I would suggest that we take a look at these priorities that were presented to us tonight. We will discuss them at our next council meeting as an agenda discussion item again. So it's just to get some more feedback amongst the six of us, because I hope you guys realize that the only time that we can discuss things together is in this venue. We do not discuss these in public. We cannot do that by law. And so the first time that we see a lot of items is the same as the first time you see a lot of items. And I think you need to be aware of that. So this venue to have discussion continuing on is very healthy for us, and will help us make an informed, intelligent decision on where to go with the funding in the future. And remember, we've got a workshop coming up, starting our budget workshop very soon as well. So there are lots of venues that are available to us to work within to make sure that we do this right. I totally agree with you. All of you, we totally agree that we don't want to jump in this with a hasty decision. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Points all well taken about not wanting to make hasty decisions. Absolutely agree with everybody. We want to be fully informed. Got to make sure we have all the information to understand the impact of what our decisions will have on our great city. However, I also like to be prepared for multiple options, multiple courses of action. With that in mind, Mr. Mayor, one of the things that I've proposed, and it's been discussed several times tonight, is putting a measure on the November ballot that would reallocate the venue tax into something else, whether it's streets, general, a combination of all of those, reduction of property taxes, etc. I propose that part of the direction that we give to staff is to start drafting a proposed language for that November ballot with a few blanks in there that would be to reallocate the venue tax into something to start looking at the possibility of having that language on the ballot rather than having to struggle at the last minute if that's the way that the council decides to move forward with it.
Okay, well, there's no decisions tonight, right?
No, sir, no, sir.
Consensus that we would like to have staff take a look at a potential language that would go into a ballot. It could be as early as November.
Yes,
it could be at another time. Yes, depending on how we look at it.
Could we have the ballot, if the council decides to move forward with that, could we do it in any election other than in November?
November or May?
We could do it in May.
Remember, this year is already accounted for. It's starting in 2024. That's the year that we're looking at for the change. And could that be the vote? If you decide to go that you want to go to the voters, fine. It could be in November. It could be in May. May gives us even more time to work on the issue and get more feedback from you all. I think it's important for you guys. We continue to get the input from you. That feedback is really important, and that's why we had the meeting tonight. And that's why I think we should have continue meetings, whether they be special or they be continually discussed at our council meetings. So, yeah, we're going to wrap this up in a minute. Go ahead.
Are we going to have May elections available to us now? I thought this was going to be the last one because of Guadalupe County.
No, that's a whole other issue.
We're still working on it, and I apologize for those of you who were not here when we had this discussion. Guadalupe County, which we are now a part of because of our properties that we've annexed in the ETJ on the other side of 1518. They are in Guadalupe County. Guadalupe County only has voting centers, meaning their residents can vote anywhere in November. And the only way we can have May elections as a city in Guadalupe County is if we physically have our own city building over there. So we are still working with the county to try to figure out a way for those residents, current and future, to be able to vote. One of the recommendations has been that we move our city council elections to November. The council has not actually vetted most of that information at this point, And so we are continuing to work on that with the Bear County clerk, is it? No, Bear County elections clerk and the Guadalupe County elections clerk to see if we can get them to some kind of a compromise, which I know we've been working on. So we'll see how that all pans out. It's just another complication, I understand. I did want to make just one observation, and that, Mary, you said we were going to have these at our next council meeting. You recognize that our next council meeting is just a week away. This is not a regular council meeting, but we do have one on the 18th. We will start looking at these things, but I can't guarantee that we're going to have.
No, we wouldn't expect you to come up with something by next week.
Thank you. We'll shoot for the first.
I think the
meeting
direction
in May.
is to take a look at some language that could be used on a ballot.
Yeah, well, no, I'm saying, I've been writing down what everybody's been saying as in your direction, and I know there's not a consensus on which ones to do first, but the open space question, the interfund payment, looking to see if it's the full golf course loan, the golf course expenditures, the park budget, 2002 park plan, and multiple choices for ballot language. So I'm just saying that even by May 2nd, I think is our first meeting, we may not have all of those items, but we'll get done as much as we can.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for coming and seeing. I hope this was informative for you. We learn something every time we get together as well. Again, you need to understand that we don't interact with each other by law. We can't. So this is the only chance that we have to interface with each other and discuss these items. So thanks very much for coming, and we'll keep you attuned. You're welcome at every council meeting we have. We're going to have another special meeting or two. We'll post that so you're all aware of it. There's plenty of time to make those decisions. So again, thank you very much for coming this evening, and right now it's 5 after 8, so we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Counsel, for being here this evening.
What is one thing? Can we cover that?